The chains bit into Ember's wrists as the wagon lurched over another rut in the road, sending pain shooting up her arms and into her shoulders. She braced herself against the rough wooden slats, her swollen belly pressing uncomfortably against her thighs as she tried to find a position that didn't make every bone in her body ache. The iron shackles were too tight. They always had been, ever since Corvus had ordered them clasped around her wrists 3 days ago in front of the entire Blackwood pack. 3 days. Had it really only been 3 days since her world had shattered? Ember closed her eyes and pressed her forehead against the cold metal bars of her cage, trying to breathe through the nausea that had become her constant companion. The babies shifted inside her, 6 distinct presences that she had learned to feel separately over the past months. They were restless today, picking up on her fear and her exhaustion and her bone-deep despair. She pressed a hand to the swell of her abdomen, trying to send them comfort she didn't feel. "I'm sorry," she thought, not for the first time. "I'm so sorry I couldn't protect you from this." For a moment, just a heartbeat, she felt warmth bloom beneath her palm. A faint golden shimmer seemed to dance at the edge of her vision, gone before she could focus on it. Exhaustion, she told herself. Dehydration. Nothing more. The wagon hit another rut, and Ember's teeth clacked together painfully. The driver didn't slow down. Why would he? She was cargo now, not a person. Treaty tribute, Corvus had called her, his lip curling with disgust as he'd waved her away with a flick of his hand. He hadn't bothered with formal dissolution papers. Why would he document the disposal of garbage? "The Ashfall pack can have her," he'd announced to the gathered wolves, his voice ringing with false magnanimity. "Consider her our gift, a gesture of goodwill toward our struggling neighbors." A gift. As if she were a bolt of cloth or a basket of grain, not a woman carrying 6 lives inside her. Not the woman he'd claimed as his mate just 8 months ago, his eyes burning with possessive fire as he'd marked her neck and declared her his before the moon. Ember's hand drifted to her throat, to the scar that still marred her skin. Corvus's mark had faded the moment he'd spoken the words of rejection, the bond between them snapping like a dry twig. She'd felt it, a wrenching, tearing sensation in her chest that had driven her to her knees. For a moment she'd thought she was dying. Part of her had wished she was. But then she'd felt them. Her babies, stirring in response to her distress, and she'd known she had to survive. For them, if not for herself. The memory of the rejection ceremony played behind her closed eyelids, as vivid and painful as a fresh wound. Healer Thornwood's face, pale and troubled as she'd completed her examination. The way she'd looked at Ember with something that might have been pity before turning to address the waiting alpha. 6, she'd said, her voice barely above a whisper. "She carries 6 pups." The silence that had followed had been absolute, a held breath, a frozen moment. And then Corvus had laughed. It wasn't a sound of joy or wonder or even confusion. It was a laugh of revulsion, of disgust, of contempt. He'd looked at Ember as if she were something he'd found rotting in a ditch. Something unclean and unnatural. 6, he'd repeated, the word dripping with disdain. For just a heartbeat, so brief she must have imagined it, something else had flickered in his eyes. Something calculating, almost hungry. Then it was gone, replaced by revulsion. "No true wolf carries so many at once. It's an abomination, a curse." "Corvus!" Ember had stepped toward him, her hands outstretched in supplication. "Please, you can't mean... Don't touch me." He'd recoiled from her as if her very presence offended him, his handsome face twisted with loathing. "Don't you dare touch me with your cursed hands. What kind of monster are you to spawn such a litter?" The words had hit her like physical blows, each one driving the air from her lungs. She'd looked around the gathered pack, searching for a friendly face, an ally, anyone who might speak in her defense. But the wolves of Blackwood had looked away, their expressions ranging from discomfort to open hostility. She was alone. Completely, utterly alone. "This is unnatural," Corvus had continued, warming to his theme as the pack muttered agreement. "No Omega in recorded history has carried more than 4 pups. 6 is a sign of dark magic, of tainted blood. I should have known something was wrong with you from the start." "There's nothing wrong with me." The words had emerged stronger than Ember had expected, fueled by a spark of defiance she hadn't known she still possessed. "These are your children, Corvus. Our children. How can you—" "They are not my children." His voice had cracked like a whip, silencing her. "No offspring of mine would be born from such an abomination. Whatever grows inside you is the result of your own corruption. Perhaps you've lain with demons, or dabbled in blood magic. Whatever the case, it has nothing to do with me." The lie was so blatant, so absurd, that Ember had almost laughed. She'd been faithful to him from the moment of their mating, had barely left the pack house, in fact, as her pregnancy had progressed, and Corvus had become increasingly controlling. But looking at the faces around her, she'd realized that truth didn't matter. Corvus was the alpha, his word was law, and his word had condemned her. "I, Corvus Blackwood, alpha of the Blackwood Pack, hereby reject you as my mate." He'd spoken the ritual words with relish, savoring each syllable. "I cast you out from my pack and my protection. You are no longer Wolf of Blackwood, you are nothing. Nothing but a cursed vessel, and the sooner you're removed from our lands, the better." The bond had snapped then, and Ember had crumpled. Strong hands had caught her. Guards, she'd realized dimly, holding her upright not out of kindness, but because Corvus wasn't finished with his performance. "But I am not without mercy," he'd continued, and Ember had known with sick certainty that whatever came next would be worse than anything that had come before. "I won't leave you to die in the wilderness like the animal you are. Instead, I will send you as tribute to the Ashfall Pack. Let their broken alpha deal with your corruption. He rules over nothing but ashes and orphans anyway. You'll fit right in among the ruins." Laughter had rippled through the pack at that. Everyone knew about Ashfall, the broken pack, the failed pack, the pack that had been devastated by plague and war and now clung to existence in the ruins of what had once been a great territory. Their alpha, Cyrus Wildfire, was said to rule over nothing but ghosts and refugees. Sending Ember to him was a joke. A cruel, calculated joke designed to humiliate her in the final chapter of her destruction. The wagon lurched again, and Ember opened her eyes, blinking against the harsh afternoon light. The landscape had changed while she'd been lost in memory, the lush forests of Blackwood territory giving way to something starker, wilder. The trees here were older, their trunks scarred by fire, their branches reaching toward the sky like supplicating hands. Ash still coated the ground in places, a gray blanket that spoke of devastation. Ashfall. They were entering Ashfall territory. Ember's wolf stirred inside her for the first time in days, lifting her head as if scenting something on the wind. Ember frowned, confused by the sudden alertness after so much dormancy. Since the rejection, her wolf had been silent, grieving perhaps, or simply too weakened by the severed bond to make herself known. But now she was awake, and she was interested. "What is it?" Ember asked silently. "What do you sense?" But her wolf didn't answer in words. Instead, Ember felt a pulling sensation in her chest, a warmth that spread outward from her heart like ripples in a pond. It was strange, unfamiliar, and yet somehow not unpleasant. Like coming in from the cold to find a fire burning in the hearth. The wagon rolled to a stop. Ember's heart began to pound as voices reached her ears. Low, masculine voices speaking in tones of authority. She couldn't make out the words, but she could hear the driver responding, his voice taking on the obsequious quality of a lesser wolf addressing his betters. "This is it," she thought. "This is where I'll die." Because surely that was what awaited her. Corvus had sent her as tribute, as a gift. But she was no gift. She was a burden. A pregnant, rejected, supposedly cursed Omega with no value to anyone. The Alpha of Ashfall would take one look at her and see exactly what Corvus had seen, a problem to be disposed of. The wagon's door opened with a screech of rusted hinges, and Ember flinched back against the far wall of her cage, her chains rattling. She expected rough hands, harsh words, perhaps a blade to end it quickly. What she got was silence. She raised her head slowly, squinting against the sudden brightness, and found herself looking into a pair of amber eyes that burned like molten gold. The world stopped. Ember couldn't breathe, couldn't think, couldn't do anything but stare at the man standing at the wagon's entrance. He was tall, taller than Corvus, taller than any wolf she'd ever seen, with broad shoulders that blocked out the sun and dark hair that fell across a face carved from granite. Scars marked his skin, silver lines that spoke of battles survived, and his jaw was set in an expression of such fierce intensity that Ember should have been terrified. She wasn't terrified. She was warm. The heat that had begun in her chest was spreading now, flooding through her veins like wildfire racing through dry brush. Her wolf surged forward with a force that stole her breath, and a single word echoed through Ember's mind with the weight of absolute certainty. Mate. No. That was impossible. She'd had a mate, had been rejected by him, had felt the bond shatter and fade. Wolves didn't get second mates. It wasn't how the magic worked. But her wolf wasn't listening to logic. Her wolf was pressing against Ember's skin, desperate to get closer to the man who stood frozen in the wagon's doorway, his amber eyes now blazing with pure gold light. Cyrus Wildfire, Alpha of Ashfall, wasn't moving. He stood as if he'd been turned to stone, his massive chest heaving with breaths that came too fast, too ragged. His nostrils flared once, twice, drinking in her scent, and a low growl rumbled from somewhere deep in his chest, a sound that made every wolf within earshot take a step back. Every wolf except Ember. She should have been afraid. He was an alpha in the grip of something primal, something raw, and she was chained and vulnerable and heavily pregnant with another man's children. But fear was the last thing she felt as his eyes raked over her, taking in the chains, the bruises, the swell of her belly. Mate, her wolf said again, and this time Ember didn't argue. Cyrus moved then, stepping into the wagon with a grace that belied his size. The wooden floor creaked under his weight, but he didn't seem to notice. His entire focus was on Ember, on her face, her body, her presence. He reached through the space between them and touched her cheek with fingers that trembled slightly, his rough skin impossibly gentle against her battered flesh. "You carry life," he murmured, his voice a low rasp that vibrated through her bones. His other hand hovered over her belly, not quite touching, as if he was afraid she might shatter. "And you carry my future." Ember's hands flew to her swollen abdomen, instinct and confusion warring inside her. Her wolf was howling with joy, straining toward this man who was supposed to be a stranger but felt like coming home. But her mind, her poor, battered, betrayed mind, couldn't process what was happening. "I don't understand," she whispered. I was already mated. I was rejected. This can't be real." Something dark flashed through Cyrus's eyes at her words. Rage, she realized, though not directed at her. His jaw tightened, and for a moment, she glimpsed the alpha beneath the gentleness, the warrior who had survived when his pack had burned. "Who rejected you?" The question was quiet, controlled, but Ember could hear the violence lurking beneath the calm. "Corvus Blackwood." She shouldn't be telling him this. She shouldn't be telling him anything, but the words spilled out of her anyway, drawn forth by the inexplicable bond that was forming between them with every passing second. He said I was cursed, because of the babies, because there are 6 of them. He said no true wolf carries so many, that I must be an abomination. The growl that emerged from Cyrus's chest was loud enough to shake the wagon. Outside, she heard wolves whimpering, heard the scramble of feet as his pack responded to their alpha's fury. But his touch on her face remained gentle, his thumb brushing away tears she hadn't realized she was crying. "You are no abomination," he said, and the words rang with the weight of an alpha's command. "You are a miracle, and you are mine." Mine. The word should have frightened her. She'd been claimed before, possessed before, and look where that had gotten her. But when Cyrus said it, she didn't feel owned. She felt protected, cherished, safe. Her wolf settled inside her with a contented sigh, and Ember realized with dawning wonder that for the first time in months, she didn't feel alone. The babies kicked, all 6 of them moving at once, and Cyrus's eyes widened as he felt the movement against his hovering hand. His expression transformed from fierce intensity to something softer, something almost reverent. "They know," he murmured. "They know they're home." Ember looked into his eyes, that impossible shade caught between honey and firelight, at the scars on his face and the gentleness in his touch, and felt something shift inside her. Not just the mate bond. That was already there, already settling into her bones. This was something else, something that felt dangerously like hope. "I don't even know you," she whispered. Cyrus's lips curved into the ghost of a smile. "Then we'll learn each other. But know this, little wolf." He leaned closer, his breath warm against her ear. "You will never wear chains in my territory, and anyone who tries to harm you or your pups will answer to me." He straightened and turned to the guards who had accompanied the wagon, his voice shifting from tender to terrible in an instant. "Get these chains off my mate, now." The guards scrambled to obey, their hands shaking as they fumbled with the iron locks that bound Ember's wrists. She could smell their fear, sharp and acrid, cutting through the ash and pine that seemed to permeate everything in this territory. They were terrified of their alpha, she realized, terrified of the rage that still radiated from him in waves, even though his touch on her had been nothing but gentle. The first shackle fell away with a clang that echoed through the silent clearing, and Ember gasped as blood rushed back into her fingers. The skin beneath the iron was raw and weeping, abraded down to the meat in places where the metal had bitten deepest during the journey. She'd grown so accustomed to the pain that she'd almost forgotten it was there. But now, looking at the damage, she felt her stomach lurch. Cyrus made a sound, low, guttural, more animal than man. His eyes fixed on her wounded wrists, and the gold in them blazed brighter, hotter, until Ember could have sworn she felt heat radiating from his gaze alone. "Who did this?" The words were barely human, scraped from somewhere deep in his chest. "Who put these chains on you?" "Corvus ordered it." The second shackle fell, and Ember cradled both wrists against her chest, trying to still their trembling. "After the rejection, he said I wasn't to be trusted, that I might try to run or hurt myself or—" She trailed off, the memory of those final hours in Blackwood territory rising like bile in her throat. Cyrus's hand came up slowly, giving her time to pull away if she wanted to. When she didn't, when she couldn't, because her wolf was straining toward him with a desperation that bordered on physical pain, he cupped her elbow with infinite care, turning her arm so he could see the full extent of the damage. "These will scar." His voice was rough, barely controlled. "These will scar, and every time I see them, I will remember what he did to you. It doesn't matter." The words came out flat, exhausted. "I'm just grateful they're off." It matters. Cyrus released her arm and stepped back, visibly wrestling himself under control. The gold in his eyes dimmed slightly, returning to that molten amber that somehow managed to be both fierce and warm. Everything that was done to you matters, and when the time comes, there will be a reckoning. Ember didn't know what to say to that. She'd stopped believing in justice somewhere between the rejection ceremony and the first night in the wagon, when she'd lain awake on the hard wooden floor and listened to the guards joke about what would become of her in Ashfall. Corvus's cast-off, they'd called her. The Alpha's garbage. But Cyrus wasn't looking at her like garbage. He was looking at her like she was something precious, something worth protecting, and the cognitive dissonance was making her head spin. "Can you walk?" he asked, extending a hand to help her from the wagon. "My healer is waiting at the main house. She'll tend to your wrists and examine you, make sure the journey hasn't harmed the pups." Ember hesitated, staring at his outstretched hand. It was large and scarred, the knuckles rough with old calluses, but he held it palm up, an offering rather than a demand. She could refuse. She could see in his eyes that he would accept her refusal, that he wouldn't force her to take what he was giving. The realization hit her like a physical blow. Corvus had never given her choices, not real ones. From the moment he'd claimed her, she'd been his to command, his to control, his to do with as he pleased. She'd learned to anticipate his moods, to make herself small and agreeable, to want what he wanted before he even knew he wanted it. But this man, this scarred, fierce, inexplicably gentle man, was waiting for her to decide. Ember reached out and placed her hand in his. The contact sent a jolt through her entire body, lightning racing up her arm and exploding in her chest. Her wolf howled with triumph, with recognition, with a joy so pure it brought tears to her eyes. She heard Cyrus's sharp intake of breath, felt his fingers tighten around hers as he experienced the same shock of connection. "You feel it." It wasn't a question. His eyes were molten gold again, fixed on her face with an intensity that should have been frightening. "The bond. You feel it." Ember nodded, not trusting her voice. She felt it. Goddess help her? She felt it more strongly than she'd ever felt her bond with Corvus. That connection had been a thin thread, easily ignored, easily severed. This was a rope, a chain, an unbreakable tether that wound around her heart and pulled. "I don't understand how this is possible," she managed finally. "I was mated. I was rejected. The bond should be... I shouldn't be able to... Rejection severs an incomplete bond." Cyrus's thumb traced gentle circles on the back of her hand, and each touch sent fresh sparks dancing across her skin. A bond that was never meant to be. When the true mate bond forms, it overrides everything that came before. "True mate bond?" Ember's voice came out as a whisper. "You mean, we're fated." The word rumbled from his chest with absolute certainty. "You are my fated mate, Ember. The one the goddess chose for me before either of us drew breath. I've waited 32 years to find you, and I will spend the rest of my life thanking the moon that you were brought to my territory, even if the circumstances were..." His jaw tightened, rage flickering behind the gold. "Even if the circumstances were unforgivable." Fated mates. Ember had heard the stories, of course. Everyone had. The legendary bonds that transcended pack lines and political alliances, that bound two wolves together so completely that death itself couldn't truly separate them. But she'd always assumed they were just that. Stories. Fairy tales told to pups to make them believe in happy endings. She'd stopped believing in happy endings a long time ago. "I can see you don't trust this." Cyrus released her hand slowly, and she was surprised by how much she missed the contact. "I can see you've been given every reason not to trust anything a man tells you. But I'm going to prove it to you, Ember. Every day, in every way I can, I'm going to prove that you're safe here, that you're wanted here, that you and your pups have a home in Ashfall for as long as you need one." He stepped back, giving her space to breathe, to think. The guards had scattered. She hadn't even noticed them leave. And they were alone in the clearing, surrounded by the scarred trees and ash-gray soil of his broken territory. "Come," he said, gesturing toward a path that wound between the trees. "Let me take you somewhere warm, somewhere you can rest." Ember followed him, her hand pressed to her belly as the babies stirred within her. They seemed calmer now, their movements less frantic, as if they too could feel the change in their circumstances, as if they knew, somehow, that they had finally reached somewhere safe. She wasn't ready to believe it yet, but for the first time in 3 days, for the first time since Corvus had spoken the words that shattered her world, she let herself hope that maybe, just maybe, this broken pack and its scarred alpha might prove her wrong. The path wound through the damaged forest for perhaps half a mile before opening into a clearing that took Ember's breath away. She'd expected ruins. Everyone said Ashfall was nothing but ruins, a graveyard of what had once been a powerful pack. And there were ruins, she could see them. Collapsed buildings half hidden by new growth, scorched foundations where homes had once stood, a great hall reduced to nothing but a skeleton of blackened beams. But there was life here too. New structures rose beside the old, built from salvaged timber and fresh-cut logs. Wolves moved between them with purpose, carrying supplies, tending gardens that had been carved from the ashen soil. Children played near a stream that sparkled in the afternoon light, their laughter ringing through the clearing like bells. "We're rebuilding." Cyrus's voice was quiet, almost hesitant. "It's slow work, and we've lost much, but Ashfall will rise again." Ember looked at him, really looked at him, and saw for the first time the weight he carried. The scars on his face were echoed in his eyes, in the set of his shoulders, in the way he surveyed his territory with a mixture of pride and grief. He'd lost things too, she realized, maybe everything. "What happened here?" she asked before she could stop herself. Pain flickered across his features, there and gone. "A plague, at first. It swept through the pack 2 years ago and took nearly half our number. The very young and the very old, mostly. We were still reeling from that when the Shadowcrest pack attacked. They'd been waiting for us to weaken, circling like vultures." His jaw tightened. "We drove them off, but the cost was—" He shook his head. "We lost our Luna in that battle, my mother, and most of our warriors. I'm sorry." The words felt inadequate, but they were all she had. "Don't be sorry." Cyrus's eyes met hers, and she saw the resolve that burned beneath the grief. "We survived. We're still here. And now—" His gaze dropped to her belly, and something shifted in his expression. Something warm and wondering. "Now the goddess has sent us hope." Before Ember could respond to that, before she could even begin to process what he meant, a woman emerged from one of the new buildings and hurried toward them. She was older, perhaps 50, with gray-streaked hair pulled back in a practical braid and sharp eyes that assessed Ember with professional efficiency. "Alpha." The woman's tone was brisk, but not unfriendly. "The chamber is prepared, and I have everything I need for the examination. If the lady would follow me?" "Ember." Cyrus turned to her, that same careful patience in his voice. "This is Sage, our head healer. She'll take care of your wrists and check on the pups. I'll be nearby if you need anything at all, but I won't intrude on your privacy unless you ask me to." Ember blinked at him. "You're not coming?" Something flickered in his eyes. Longing, she thought, quickly suppressed. "The examination is intimate. I didn't think you'd want—" He stopped, seeming to struggle with himself. "I didn't want you to feel cornered, overwhelmed. You've been through enough." He was giving her space. She'd been his mate for less than an hour, and he was already putting her comfort above his own desires. Corvus had insisted on being present for every examination, every consultation, his possessive grip on her shoulder a constant reminder of who she belonged to. But Cyrus was stepping back, letting her breathe. "Thank you," she whispered, and watched something like joy transform his scarred features before he nodded and turned away. Sage led her to a building near the center of the settlement, small but sturdy, with herbs hanging from the rafters and a fire crackling in a stone hearth. The warmth wrapped around Ember like an embrace as she stepped inside, and she felt her shoulders unknot slightly for the first time since the rejection. "Sit," Sage instructed, gesturing to a chair piled with cushions. "Let me see those wrists." "Wait." Ember's voice came out stronger than she expected. Sage paused, eyebrows raised. "Before you examine me, I need to know something. Am I a prisoner here? A bargaining chip? If this pack plans to use me like Blackwood did, I'd rather know now." Sage's expression shifted from surprise to something like respect. "You've got spine. Good. You'll need it." She met Ember's gaze directly. "You're not a prisoner. The Alpha could have claimed you the moment you arrived. Pack law would have allowed it. Instead, he asked permission to touch you. Does that tell you something?" Ember considered this for a long moment. Then she sat and extended her arms, choosing trust for the first time since Corvus had shattered her world. She tried not to wince as the healer examined the damage. Sage's touch was competent and surprisingly gentle, her clucks of disapproval a running commentary as she cleaned and bandaged the wounds. "Iron shackles," she muttered, "on a pregnant Omega. What kind of animal?" She cut herself off with a sharp shake of her head. "Never mind. You're safe now. The Alpha won't let anything happen to you." "You seem very certain of that." Sage looked up, her sharp eyes softening slightly. "I've known Cyrus since he was a pup taking his first steps. I delivered him, in fact, and every pup born to this pack for the past 30 years. I know what kind of man he is." She finished wrapping the second wrist and sat back. "He's fierce when he needs to be. Goddess knows we wouldn't have survived without that fierceness. But underneath all that growl, he's gentle. Fair. He'll protect you with his life, if it comes to that." Ember didn't know what to say. The portrait Sage was painting was so different from what she'd expected, from what she'd been taught to expect from alphas. Corvus had been charming at first, all smooth words and heated glances, but the charm had been a mask for something darker, something that saw her as property, not person. Could Cyrus truly be different? Or was this just another mask, destined to slip? Sage seemed to read her thoughts. "You don't trust it," she said quietly. "I can see it in your eyes. You're waiting for the other shoe to drop. And given what you've clearly been through, I can't blame you. But I'm asking you to give him a chance. Give us a chance. Ashfall needs hope, and those pups you're carrying." Her eyes dropped to Ember's belly and her expression softened further. "They might just be the hope we've been praying for." The examination that followed was thorough but not invasive, Sage's hands moving over Ember's belly with practiced care as she felt for each pup in turn. Her eyebrows rose when she confirmed the number, but there was no disgust in her expression, only wonder. Sage paused, frowning, her hand still pressed to Ember's belly. "That's strange." "What?" Ember tensed. "Is something wrong?" "No, nothing wrong. It's just—" Sage shook her head slowly. "For a moment, I could have sworn I felt something. A warmth. Almost like—" She trailed off, then smiled. "Old healers and their superstitions. Pay me no mind." "6," she breathed. 6 healthy heartbeats. "Do you know how rare this is? How blessed you are?" "Corvus called me cursed," Ember said flatly. "He said no true wolf carries so many, that I must be an abomination." Sage made a sound of pure contempt. "Corvus Blackwood is a fool and a coward who doesn't deserve to lick the mud from your boots. Multiple births are rare because they require extraordinary strength, from the mother and from the pups. You're not cursed, child. You're remarkable. The words settled into Ember's chest, warm and unfamiliar. No one had ever called her remarkable before. Useful, sometimes. Obedient. Adequate. But never remarkable. When she emerged from the healer's building, clean and bandaged, and wrapped in a soft robe that Sage had produced from somewhere, she found Cyrus waiting outside. He was pacing, she noticed. Short, restless movements that spoke of contained energy. But he stopped the moment he saw her. "Everything is well?" The question came out rough, almost desperate. "The pups are healthy?" 6 strong heartbeats, Ember confirmed, and watched the tension drain from his shoulders like water. "Sage says I'm—" She hesitated over the word. "She says I'm remarkable." Cyrus's lips curved into a smile that transformed his face, softening the harsh lines and making him look almost boyish. "She's right. You are remarkable." He extended his hand, palm up, an echo of his gesture at the wagon. "Come, let me show you your chamber." Your chamber, not our chamber, not the Alpha's chamber. Your chamber. Ember took his hand, feeling that lightning jolt of connection again, and let him lead her across the settlement to a building set slightly apart from the others. It was larger than the healer's lodge, built from pale wood that hadn't yet weathered to gray, with windows that caught the afternoon light. "This was meant to be the new Luna's quarters," Cyrus said as he opened the door. "We finished it last month. I never imagined—" He stopped, shaking his head. "I never imagined I'd have someone to give it to." The interior was simple, but beautiful. A large bed dominated one wall, piled high with furs and quilts in shades of cream and gold. A fire already crackled in the hearth, chasing away the autumn chill. There were soft chairs arranged near the windows, a carved wooden table holding a basin and pitcher, and everywhere, small touches that spoke of care, dried flowers in a clay vase, extra candles arranged on the mantel, a basket of what looked like fresh bread and fruit. "You did this," Ember said slowly. "You prepared all of this for me." "I had help." Cyrus stood in the doorway, not entering, giving her space to explore. "When the sentries reported the tribute wagon approaching, I gave orders. I wanted you to be comfortable, to have everything you might need." Ember turned to face him, drawing herself up despite her exhaustion. "I want to make something clear. I'm grateful for the kindness, truly. But I won't be a decoration. If I'm to be here, I want to be useful. I want to help with the rebuilding, with the pack, with whatever needs doing." She lifted her chin. "I won't be kept like a songbird in a gilded cage." Something flickered in Cyrus's expression. Surprise? Then approval. "You won't be kept at all. If you want to contribute, we'll find ways. The pack needs every willing hand." "Good." She nodded, then added more softly, "But you didn't know it was me. You didn't know we were—" She couldn't bring herself to say the word. "You didn't know." "No." His voice was quiet. "But I knew you were coming to us alone and afraid, carrying lives inside you. I knew you deserved better than a cage and chains. That was enough." Ember turned to look at him, really look at him, and felt something crack inside her chest. He wasn't trying to impress her, she realized. He wasn't performing kindness to earn something in return. He was simply kind, simply decent, simply everything Corvus had never been. "Why?" The word came out barely above a whisper. "Why do you care?" Cyrus held her gaze, his expression fierce with an intensity that made her breath catch. "Because you're my mate. And even if you weren't—" He paused, seeming to choose his words carefully. "Even if you weren't, you would still be a person deserving of compassion. You would still be a mother fighting to protect her children. You would still be worthy of care." She didn't realize she was crying until she felt the tears sliding down her cheeks, hot and sudden and impossible to stop. She turned away, mortified, pressing her hands to her face as sobs racked her exhausted body. She felt rather than saw him move, felt the warmth of him approaching, felt the air shift as he came to stand behind her. But he didn't touch her. He didn't pull her into his arms or try to force comfort on her. He simply waited. "I'm sorry," she gasped between sobs. "I don't know why I'm—" "Don't apologize." His voice was low, rough with something that might have been his own emotion. "You've been through hell. You're allowed to break." The permission undid her completely. She crumpled, and this time he did catch her, his arms coming around her with exquisite care as she sobbed against his chest. He didn't shush her or try to make her stop. He just held her, one hand stroking her hair, his heartbeat steady and strong beneath her ear. "You're safe now," he murmured, the words a rumbling vibration against her cheek. "I've got you. You're safe." Ember didn't know how long she cried, long enough for the light to shift, for the shadows to lengthen, for her tears to finally slow and stop. When she lifted her head, she found Cyrus watching her with an expression of such tender concern that it made her heart clench. "Better?" he asked softly. She nodded, suddenly aware of how close they were, how warm he was, how good he smelled. Pine and wood smoke, and something deeper, something that called to her wolf like a beacon in the darkness. "I should let you rest." He released her slowly, reluctantly, stepping back to put space between them. "Sage left food in the basket, and there's water in the pitcher. If you need anything, anything at all, just ask any wolf you see. They'll find me." He turned to go, and Ember heard herself speak before she could think better of it. "Wait." Cyrus stopped, looking back at her with that patient, waiting expression. "Stay." The word came out small, uncertain. "Just, not here, not—" She flushed, realizing how it sounded. "Just nearby. In case I—" She couldn't finish the sentence, couldn't admit how frightened she was of being alone with her thoughts. But Cyrus seemed to understand. His expression softened, and he nodded once. "I'll be right outside," he said, "within calling distance. And Ember?" She looked up. "You're not alone anymore. Whatever comes, you won't have to face it alone." He left her then, closing the door softly behind him. But she could hear him settling onto what sounded like a bench just outside, could sense his presence through the new bond that hummed between them. She wasn't alone. For the first time in longer than she could remember, she wasn't alone. Ember sank onto the bed, burying her face in the soft furs, and let exhaustion claim her. Her last thought before sleep took her was of golden eyes and gentle hands, and a voice that promised safety. Maybe, just maybe, she could learn to believe it. The next morning dawned gray and cool, mist rising from the ground like ghosts dancing between the trees. Ember woke slowly, disoriented by the unfamiliar softness beneath her, by the smell of clean linens instead of wagon wood. For one terrible moment she thought she was back in Blackwood, that the rejection had been a nightmare she was only now waking from. Then she felt the baby's kick, felt the throb of her bandaged wrists, and reality came flooding back. She was in Ashfall, in the Luna's quarters, in the territory of her fated mate. The thought still seemed impossible. But as she sat up and looked around the sun-dappled room, she couldn't deny what she felt. That warm, golden thread connecting her heart to something beyond these walls. To him. To Cyrus. A knock sounded at her door, soft and questioning. "Ember?" Cyrus's voice, low and careful. "Are you awake? Sage prepared breakfast if you're hungry." Her stomach answered before she could, growling loudly enough to be embarrassing. She heard a quiet chuckle from the other side of the door. "I'll take that as a yes. May I come in?" "May I?" Not, I'm coming in. Not open the door. May I? Yes, she called, pulling the furs up to cover her still-robed form. Cyrus entered carrying a wooden tray laden with more food than Ember had seen in weeks. Fresh bread, still steaming. Butter and honey in small clay pots. Some kind of fruit preserve that smelled of summer. A thick slice of what looked like venison, cooked until the edges were crispy. Sage says you need to eat more, he said, setting the tray on the bedside table. You're feeding 7 now, not 1. She was very emphatic about it. Ember stared at the feast, her throat tightening with an emotion she couldn't name. This is too much. I can't possibly. Eat what you can. Cyrus settled into the chair by the window, deliberately putting distance between them. Whatever you don't finish, we'll save for later, but try, please. For the pups. For the pups. Not for him, not because he demanded it, but for the lives growing inside her. Ember reached for the bread, tearing off a piece and bringing it to her lips. The first bite was heaven, warm and fresh, and nothing like the stale crusts she'd been given on the wagon. She ate more, and more, barely pausing to breathe as her body suddenly realized how starved it had been. Cyrus watched her eat with an expression of quiet satisfaction, making no comment when she devoured nearly everything on the tray. When she finally sat back, hand pressed to her full belly, he smiled. Better? Much. She hesitated, then added, Thank you. For this. For everything. You didn't have to. I did. His voice was firm. You're my mate. Caring for you isn't a choice, Ember. It's a need. He paused, seeming to consider his next words. I know you're not ready to believe that yet. I know trust has to be earned, not demanded. But I hope, in time, you'll see that I mean every word. Before she could respond, a commotion outside drew both their attention. Voices raised in argument, one of them sharp and strident, the other low and placating. Cyrus's expression darkened. Wait here. He was out the door before Ember could object, and she heard his growl cut through the argument like a knife. What is going on? Alpha. A woman's voice, dripping with false deference. We were just discussing the newcomer. Some of us have concerns about bringing an outsider so close to the pack's heart, especially one who comes to us as another alpha's cast-off. Ember flinched at the words, her momentary sense of safety evaporating. She knew she should stay inside, should hide and wait for the storm to pass. But something, her wolf, maybe, or some spark of defiance she'd thought Corvus had beaten out of her, drove her to her feet and out the door. The scene outside made her blood run cold. A small crowd had gathered, perhaps a dozen wolves, with Cyrus at its center. Facing him was a woman Ember didn't recognize. Beautiful, she supposed, in a cold and angular way, with hair the color of fresh snow and eyes like chips of ice. Behind her stood a handful of others, their expressions ranging from contempt to outright hostility. And they were all looking at Ember. There she is, the white-haired woman said, her lip curling. The enemy's leftovers. Tell me, Alpha, are we really expected to accept this? This creature as our Luna? Careful, Neve. Cyrus's voice was deadly quiet. Very careful. I'm only saying what everyone is thinking. Neve gestured at the crowd behind her. She comes from Blackwood, our enemies. She carries another man's pups. And you expect us to bow to her? To treat her as though she belongs here? She is my mate. The words rang through the clearing, silencing every whisper. My fated mate, chosen by the goddess herself. And you will treat her with the respect that position demands, or you will face the consequences. Neve laughed, the sound like breaking glass. Fated mate? Cyrus, please. The goddess doesn't send us damaged goods. Look at her. She turned to point at Ember, who stood frozen in the doorway. She's broken. Rejected. carrying a litter of half-breeds that will dilute our bloodlines for generations. Is that really what you want for Ashfall? After everything we've sacrificed? Cyrus moved so fast that Ember barely saw it. One moment he was standing among the crowd, the next he was inches from Neve's face, his hand wrapped around her throat, his eyes blazing with pure golden fire. "You forget yourself," he snarled. "I am your alpha. My word is law. And I say that Ember is my mate, my Luna, and the mother of my future heirs." Neve's eyes bulged, her hands clawing at his grip. The crowd behind her shuffled back, suddenly unwilling to meet their alpha's rage. "The pups she carries," Cyrus continued, his voice carrying to every wolf in the clearing, "will be raised as Ashfall. They will be pack, and anyone who disrespects them, or their mother, disrespects me." He released Neve with a shove that sent her stumbling. "Is that understood?" Silence. Absolute terrified silence. I asked if that was understood. "Yes, Alpha." The response came from a dozen throats at once, Neve's voice notably absent but her nod visible as she rubbed her bruised throat. Cyrus turned his back on them, striding toward Ember with a grace that belied the violence of moments before. When he reached her, his expression softened, the rage draining away to leave something almost vulnerable. "I'm sorry you had to see that," he said quietly. His hands were trembling, she noticed, fine tremors that spoke of barely leashed violence. "I lost control. I shouldn't have—" He stopped, jaw working. "My father used to rule through fear. I swore I'd never become that. But when she spoke about you, about the pups, I—" He shook his head, something raw and ashamed in his expression. "I'm sorry for what she said. It won't happen again." Ember looked past him at the dispersing crowd, at the woman named Neve slinking away with her supporters. She should have been frightened. Of the violence, of the politics, of the precariousness of her position. But all she felt was a strange, warm certainty. He had defended her. Publicly, ferociously, without hesitation. "You called them your heirs," she said softly. "The pups. You called them your heirs." Cyrus's eyes met hers, golden and sincere. "They will be, if you'll allow it. Blood doesn't make a father, Ember, love does. And I already love them, because they're part of you." Her wolf howled inside her, straining toward him with a need that was almost painful. And for the first time, Ember didn't fight it. "Okay," she whispered. Cyrus tilted his head, questioning. "Okay," she repeated, a little stronger. "I'll give you a chance. I'll give us a chance." The smile that broke across his face was like the sun emerging from behind clouds, warm and bright and full of promise. "That's all I ask," he said. "That's all I'll ever ask." The days that followed were the strangest of Ember's life. Not because of the pack's lingering hostility, though that remained. A constant undercurrent of whispered conversations that stopped when she entered rooms and sidelong glances that slid away when she tried to meet them. No, what made these days strange was the growing sense of rightness that settled into her bones despite everything. Cyrus was patient, so impossibly, infuriatingly patient that she sometimes wanted to shake him just to see if he would crack. He appeared at her door each morning with breakfast, not sending servants, but carrying the tray himself, steam rising from bowls of porridge sweetened with honey and plates of dried fruit that he claimed the healer said was good for the pups. He sat across the room while she ate, asking about her sleep, her dreams, whether the little ones had moved much during the night. And they were moving now. Constantly. 6 distinct lives turning and kicking and pressing against her ribs as if demanding to be acknowledged. Sometimes Ember would catch herself with both hands pressed to her belly, feeling the flutter of tiny limbs, and wonder how she had ever thought of them as a curse. "You're smiling," Cyrus observed one morning, 3 weeks after her arrival. He was seated in what had become his customary spot, a worn chair near the window, far enough to give her space but close enough that she could see the golden flecks in his amber eyes. "You've been smiling more lately." Ember felt heat creep into her cheeks. "I was just... They're active this morning. All of them." She hesitated, then added, "Would you like to feel?" The look on his face was something she would remember for the rest of her life. Hope and longing and a fierce, protective joy that made her wolf keen with recognition. He crossed the room slowly, giving her time to change her mind, and when he knelt beside her chair, his hands hovered over her belly without touching. "May I?" She took his hands in hers and placed them against the swell of her stomach. For a moment, nothing. Then one of the pups kicked directly against his palm, and Cyrus let out a sound that was half laugh, half growl. But his expression flickered, a brief furrow of his brow as if he'd felt something unexpected. "What is it?" Ember asked. "Nothing. Just..." He shook his head. "For a moment it felt warm, almost like light was pressing against my hands from the inside." He laughed softly. "I'm imagining things." "Strong," he breathed. "They're so strong, Ember." "They take after their mother," she found herself saying, and the pride in her own voice surprised her. Cyrus looked up at her, his eyes soft. "Yes," he agreed. "They do." The moment stretched between them, warm and intimate, and Ember felt her defenses giving way. The walls she had built so carefully were crumbling, stone by stone, and for the first time she didn't try to rebuild them. But peace, she was learning, was a fragile thing in the world of wolves. The first sign of trouble came a week later when the water from the northern stream began to make the pack sick. It started with the children: listlessness, fever, vomiting that left them pale and shaking. Then the adults began to show symptoms, and the healer's lodge filled with groaning wolves too weak to stand. "Poison," Cyrus said grimly, standing over the stream with his beta and 2 senior warriors. The water looked clear, smelled clean, but the evidence was undeniable. Someone contaminated the source. "Who would dare?" his beta asked. A scarred wolf named Ronan, who had been wary of Ember at first but had softened considerably after witnessing Cyrus's declaration in the clearing. "The neighboring packs know we're struggling. An attack now would be cowardly." Cyrus's jaw was tight. "Which tells me exactly who's behind this." Ember, who had insisted on accompanying him despite his protests, felt her blood run cold. She knew that look. She had seen it before, in the eyes of wolves discussing her former mate. "Corvus," she whispered. Cyrus turned to her, his expression grim. "He's been circling our borders for days. My scouts have tracked him. He never crosses the boundary, but he's always there, watching, waiting." "For what?" "For you." Cyrus's voice was heavy with something that might have been fury or might have been fear. "For the pups." The revelation hit her like a physical blow. She stumbled, and Cyrus was there instantly, his arm around her shoulders, his warmth a shield against the sudden chill that had nothing to do with the weather. "He rejected me," she said, her voice barely above a whisper. "He called me an abomination. He sold me. Why would he?" "Because Corvus Blackwood is a snake who never does anything without calculating the advantage." Cyrus guided her to a fallen log and helped her sit, his hands gentle despite the rage simmering in his eyes. "Think about it, Ember. Sextuplets. 6 healthy pups, all born at once. Do you have any idea how rare that is? How powerful they could be?" She shook her head, not understanding. "There's old lore, suppressed lore, mostly destroyed during the purges, about multiple births in wolf lines. 6 pups born at once signals a connection to the ancient bloodlines. Enhanced strength, unusual abilities, ties to the old magic." His jaw tightened. Most alphas wouldn't know this, but Corvus's grandmother was a lore keeper before she died. He would have grown up hearing these stories. The implication hit her like a blow. His disgust, the rejection. It was an act? A performance for the pack? He couldn't keep you without his wolves questioning why he'd tolerate an abomination. Cyrus's hands clenched into fists. So he rejects you publicly, sends you somewhere you'll be protected during the dangerous pregnancy, knowing Ashfall would never harm an innocent Omega, and waits. Once the pups are born and their power manifests, he swoops in to reclaim stolen property. He gets rid of a politically inconvenient mate, avoids the risk of losing you in childbirth, and gains a ready-made army. Army? The word tasted like ash in her mouth. 6 wolves, raised from birth to be soldiers, bound to him by blood and pack law. It's the kind of move Corvus would make. He's always playing games 3 steps ahead of everyone else. Ember's hands flew to her belly, covering the lives growing inside her, as if she could shield them from their father's machinations. He can't have them, she said, and her voice was stronger than she expected. They're not his. They were never his. He gave up any claim when he... She stopped, choking on the memory of chains and public humiliation and the cold satisfaction in Corvus's eyes as he watched her being dragged away. He can't have them, Cyrus agreed, his hand covering hers on her belly. And he can't have you. I swear it, Ember. On my life and my pack and everything I am, he will never touch you again. She believed him. That was the terrifying thing. After everything she had been through, after every betrayal and broken promise, she looked into Cyrus's golden eyes, and she believed him absolutely. The attacks continued over the following days. Small things at first, more contaminated water, a cache of stored grain discovered rotting with some kind of accelerant, a hunting party ambushed at the edge of Ashfall territory and driven back with injuries but no deaths. Corvus was testing them, probing their defenses, looking for weaknesses. And then the messengers arrived. There were 3 of them, all wearing the silver and black of Blackwood Pack, all bearing the cold arrogance that Ember remembered so well from her years of captivity disguised as marriage. They rode through the center of the village as if they owned it, their horses' hooves kicking up dust that made the watching wolves snarl. Cyrus met them in the clearing before the Alpha's lodge, his stance relaxed but his eyes hard as flint. Ember watched from the doorway, her heart pounding against her ribs. Alpha Cyrus Wildfire. The lead messenger's voice dripped with condescension. My master, Alpha Corvus Blackwood, sends his greetings. I'm sure he does, Cyrus said flatly. State your business and leave. The messenger's smile widened. My master wishes to inform you that you are harboring stolen property. The female Ember and the offspring she carries are Blackwood assets, and their presence in your territory constitutes an act of aggression. Stolen property. Cyrus's voice was dangerously soft. Is that what he called her? The female was bonded to Alpha Blackwood. No formal dissolution was ever filed with the Council of Packs. The rejection was verbal only, legally meaningless without documentation. The offspring are the product of that bond. Pack law is clear. They belong to Blackwood. Pack law is also clear on rejection. Cyrus stepped forward, and even from her position at the door, Ember could see the way the messenger's horse shied back, responding to the alpha power rolling off him in waves. A verbal rejection before the entire pack is binding. The council has ruled on this repeatedly. Corvus's failure to file paperwork was his own negligence, not a loophole. The bond shattered. The female and the pups became packless the moment Corvus spoke the words. I claimed what was packless. She is Ashfall now. My master disputes this interpretation. The messenger's smile had become strained. He is prepared to pursue his claim through alternative means. War. Cyrus said the word like a death sentence. He's threatening war over a woman and children he threw away like garbage. My master prefers to think of it as reclaiming what is rightfully his. The messenger reached into his saddlebag and produced a rolled scroll. This is a formal demand for the return of the female and offspring within 7 days. If the demand is not met, Alpha Blackwood will consider himself at liberty to retrieve them by force. He dropped the scroll at Cyrus's feet and wheeled his horse around. The other messengers followed, their departure as arrogant as their arrival. Silence fell over the clearing. Then Cyrus bent, picked up the scroll, and tore it in half without reading it. "Send word to our allies," he said to Ronan. "Tell them Blackwood is making threats, and double the patrols on all borders. I want to know if a single Blackwood wolf sets one paw across our territory." "What about the demand?" Ronan asked. Cyrus's eyes found embers across the clearing. In their golden depths, she saw fury and determination and something else, something that made her wolf rise up and sing. "There is no demand," he said, "only a warning. Corvus Blackwood has made his move. Now it's time to make ours." That night, after the scouts were sent and the patrols were doubled and the village had settled into an uneasy sleep, Cyrus came to Ember's room. He knocked, as he always did, and waited for her invitation before entering. "I'm not going to sleep," she said by way of greeting. She was sitting by the window, looking out at the dark forest beyond, her hands resting on her belly. "Every time I close my eyes, I see him. I see the way he looked at me when he rejected me. Like I was nothing. Less than nothing." Cyrus settled into his chair, but this time he pulled it closer, until his knees were almost touching hers. "Tell me about it," he said, "if you want to, if it would help." The invitation opened something inside her, some locked door that she had kept sealed for so long that she had almost forgotten it existed. And before she knew what she was doing, she was talking, telling him everything. About her mother, who had died when Ember was barely old enough to remember her face. About her father, who had sold her to the Blackwood Pack in exchange for a territorial concession when she was 16. About Corvus, who had seemed charming at first, attentive and handsome and everything a young wolf might dream of, until the bonding ceremony was complete and the mask came off. She told him about the years of coldness, of being paraded before other packs as Corvus's possession, but ignored in private. About the way he would touch other women openly, daring her to object, laughing when she looked away. About the night she finally fell pregnant, not from love or even desire, but from Corvus's calculation that an heir would strengthen his position, and the horror of discovering she carried not one pup, but 6. "He was furious," she said, her voice hollow. "He said it was unnatural, that no true wolf carried so many at once. He called in the pack healer to confirm, and then—" She swallowed hard. "Then he started talking about curses, about dark magic, about how I must have done something to cause it, because no Blackwood wolf had ever—" She stopped, unable to continue. The memories were too fresh, too raw. The public ceremony in the central clearing, Corvus's cold recitation of the rejection words, the chains, the wagon, the long journey to Ashfall during which she had been certain she would die. "You survived?" Cyrus's voice was rough with emotion. "You survived all of that, and you protected your pups, and you are here now. With me, with a pack that will never treat you that way. How can you be sure?" The question escaped before she could stop it. "How can you know they'll accept me? Accept them? Because I'm their alpha." He reached out slowly, giving her time to pull away. When she didn't, he took her hand and held it gently. "And because I'll rip out the throat of anyone who tries to make you feel that way again." She should have been frightened by the violence in his words. Instead, she felt the last of her resistance dissolve, some knot of fear and shame and self-doubt that had been tied so tightly for so long finally coming undone. Cyrus. His name felt strange on her lips. intimate in a way she hadn't allowed herself before. When you look at me, what do you see? His thumb traced circles on the back of her hand. I see a survivor, he said quietly. A mother. A warrior who doesn't know her own strength yet. He met her eyes, and the sincerity in his gaze made her breath catch. I see my mate, my Luna, the woman I'm going to spend the rest of my life protecting, honoring, and loving, if she'll let me. The bond between them hummed, warm and steady, like a heartbeat she could feel in her soul, and Ember made a choice. A small one maybe, in the grand scheme of things, but it felt like the most important choice she had ever made. She leaned forward and kissed him. It was gentle, just a brush of lips, hesitant and questioning. But Cyrus responded like she had offered him the world. His hand came up to cup her cheek, cradling her as if she were something precious, and the kiss deepened into something that made her wolf howl with joy. When they finally broke apart, both breathing hard, Cyrus rested his forehead against hers. I'm going to destroy him, he said, and his voice was a promise. For what he did to you, for what he's trying to do now, I'm going to make sure he never threatens you or our pups again. Our pups. The words settled into her heart like seeds taking root. Together, she said, we'll face him together. His smile was fierce and tender all at once. Together. The attack came 3 days before Corvus's deadline. It came in the dead of night, when the moon was dark and the shadows lay thick across the land. Ember was asleep. Finally, after days of restless nights, when the howling began. She jerked awake, heart pounding, to find Cyrus already on his feet. He had been sleeping in the chair by her window, insisting on staying close in case of trouble, and his eyes were blazing gold in the darkness. Stay here, he said, his voice a command that brooked no argument. Lock the door behind me. Don't open it for anyone but me or Ronan. What's happening? They're early. He was moving toward the door, his body already shifting, muscles rippling beneath his skin as his wolf rose to the surface. Corvus must have decided not to wait. Cyrus. He turned back, just for a moment, and crossed the room in 2 strides. His kiss was fierce and desperate, a promise and a plea all at once. Stay alive, he said against her lips. Stay alive for me. For them. And then he was gone, the door slamming behind him, and Ember was alone with the sound of battle raging outside. She could hear it all, the snarls and screams, the clash of claws and teeth, the thunder of running paws and the howls of wolves in pain. She pressed her back against the far wall, her hands wrapped protectively around her belly, and felt her pups stirring in response to her fear. It's okay, she whispered to them, though she wasn't sure if she was lying. It's going to be okay. He'll protect us. He promised. But the sounds of fighting were getting closer. And then she heard a voice that made her blood freeze in her veins. Find her. Corvus's command rang through the night, cold and terrible. Find my mate and bring her to me. Kill anyone who gets in your way. Ember's legs gave out. She slid down the wall, her heart hammering so hard she thought it might burst, and for one terrible moment she was 16 again, powerless, afraid, knowing that her fate was in the hands of wolves who didn't care if she lived or died. Then one of the pups kicked, hard, right under her ribs, and something woke up inside her. It started as a warmth in her belly, the same warmth she'd felt in the wagon, the same warmth Sage had sensed, the same warmth Cyrus had felt pressing against his palms. But now it wasn't flickering or uncertain. Now it was ablaze, spreading through her veins like liquid fire, filling her with a strength she had never known she possessed. A fragment of memory surfaced, her mother's voice, barely remembered. You carry something special, little Ember. Something that will wake when you need it most. Protect, whispered another voice in her mind. Not her wolf, not her mother's ghost, but something ancient, something that had slumbered in her bloodline for generations, waiting for this moment. Protect your own. The door burst open. 3 Blackwood wolves stood in the frame, their eyes gleaming with triumph, their teeth bared in hungry grins. There she is, one of them said. Just like Alpha said, fat and slow and helpless. Ember rose to her feet. The warmth was ablaze now, a fire burning so bright she could almost see it, golden light spilling from her skin, wrapping around her like armor. I am not helpless, she said, and her voice echoed with power. I am a mother, and you will not touch my children. The wolves lunged. Ember raised her hands, and the night exploded into light. The golden light erupted from Ember's hands in a blinding wave, slamming into the 3 Blackwood wolves with the force of a crashing tide. They flew backward through the doorway, their bodies hitting the corridor wall with sickening thuds that echoed through the stone. One crumpled immediately, unconscious or dead. She couldn't tell, and didn't care. The other 2 scrambled to their feet, their earlier arrogance replaced by something that looked almost like fear. What the hell is she? One of them snarled, his voice cracking. Doesn't matter. The other growled, though he didn't advance. Alpha wants her. We bring her, or we die. Then you die, Ember said, and the voice that came from her throat was hers and not hers, layered with something ancient, something that resonated in the very stones beneath her feet. The golden light pulsed around her like a living thing, responding to her heartbeat, to the frantic movements of her pups, to the fierce protective rage that burned in her chest like a second sun. The wolves hesitated. In that moment of hesitation, a massive gray form barreled into them from the side. Ronan. The beta fought with savage efficiency, his jaws closing around one wolf's throat while his claws raked across the other's flank. It was over in seconds. 2 more bodies joining the first on the corridor floor. Ronan shifted, blood streaking his chest, his eyes wide as he stared at Ember. Luna, he breathed. What? How? I don't know. The golden light was fading now, sinking back into her skin, leaving her trembling and exhausted but still standing. Still alive. Where's Cyrus? The main courtyard. Corvus brought at least 30 wolves. We were outnumbered from the start. Ronan's jaw tightened. He's holding them off, but it's bad. We need to get you somewhere safe. No. The word came out before she could think, before she could second-guess herself. But the moment it left her lips, she knew it was right. Ronan stared at her. Luna, with respect, you're pregnant with 6 pups and you just, whatever that was, it clearly drained you. I need to stand with my mate. Ember moved toward the door, her legs steadier than they had any right to be. The power was still there, she realized, not burning anymore, but simmering, waiting, ready. Corvus is here for me. He won't stop until he has me or he's dead, and I refuse to hide while Cyrus fights my battles. He would want you safe. He would want me to choose. She met Ronan's eyes, and something in her gaze made him step back. He told me once that I was a survivor. A warrior who doesn't know her own strength. Well, I'm starting to learn. And I choose to fight. For a long moment, Ronan didn't move. Then, slowly, he nodded. Stay behind me. And if things go south, they won't. She didn't know where the certainty came from, but it was absolute. The bond with Cyrus thrummed in her chest, pulling her toward him, and she could feel his emotions bleeding through. Fury, determination, and beneath it all, a thread of fear. Fear for her. She was done making him afraid. They moved through the keep quickly, Ronan leading the way while Ember followed with her hands pressed against her belly. Her pups were awake now, stirring restlessly, and she could feel their emotions as clearly as her own. Confusion, but also something that felt almost like anticipation, like they knew something was about to change. The sounds of battle grew louder as they approached the main courtyard. Snarls and screams filled the night air, punctuated by the clash of claws and the wet, terrible sound of flesh tearing. When they emerged through the main doors, Ember's breath caught in her throat. The courtyard was a chaos of bodies and blood. Ashfall wolves fought desperately against Blackwood attackers, outnumbered but not outmatched. These wolves fought for their home, their alpha, their future, and that made them fierce beyond measure. Through the chaos, Ember spotted a flash of white. Neve, her snowy hair streaming behind her as she tore into a Blackwood wolf twice her size. The woman who had called Ember the enemy's leftovers was fighting savagely for Ashfall, blood matting her pale fur, defending the pack she'd questioned Ember's right to join. And at the center of it all, Cyrus. He was magnificent and terrible, a whirlwind of silver fur and flashing fangs. 3 wolves lay broken at his feet, and 2 more circled him warily, looking for an opening. But it was the figure standing at the far end of the courtyard that drew Ember's attention. Corvus. He hadn't shifted. He stood in human form, arms crossed over his chest, watching the battle with cold satisfaction, like this was all a game, like the lives being lost meant nothing to him, like she meant nothing. Something inside Ember snapped. The golden light erupted again, brighter than before, and this time it didn't just surround her, it expanded. A shimmering dome of power spread from her outstretched hands, covering the courtyard, and every wolf within it froze. Blackwood and Ashfall alike, caught in the grip of something none of them understood. Only Cyrus moved. He turned, his massive silver form shifting back to human as his eyes found hers across the battlefield. Even from this distance she could see his shock, his awe, his love. "Ember," he breathed. "I'm here." She walked forward, the power humming through her veins, and the wolves parted before her like water before a ship's prow. "I'm done hiding." Corvus had gone very still. His cold eyes tracked her approach, and for the first time since she'd known him, she saw something that looked like uncertainty flicker across his features. Then it was gone, replaced by that familiar sneering contempt. "Impressive trick," he said. "I always knew you were hiding something, Ember. Some pathetic secret that made you think you were special." He spread his hands. "But tricks won't save you. Release my wolves. Come with me willingly, and I'll let these refugees live. Refuse, and I'll slaughter every last one of them, including your new alpha." "He's not my new alpha." Ember stopped 10 feet from Corvus, her barrier still holding every wolf in place. "He's my mate." Something dark flashed in Corvus's eyes. "The bond can be broken. I'll find a way. Those pups are mine, Ember. My blood, my legacy." He smiled, cold and cruel. "Oh, did you believe all that nonsense about abominations? You always were naive. I said what I needed to say to get rid of you without losing face, but you think I'm going to let some broken-down Alpha King raise my army? They were never going to be your army." The words came from a place of perfect clarity, and Ember felt the last of her old self, the frightened girl who had cowered beneath Corvus's cruelty, finally, completely die. They were never going to be anything to you except tools, weapons, things to be used and discarded when they stopped being useful. She placed a hand on her swollen belly. "But they're not things. They're my children, and you will never touch them." Corvus's lip curled. "You were nothing before me, and you'll be nothing when I'm done with you. I made you, Ember. I can unmake you just as easily." "No." Cyrus's voice rang across the courtyard, and Ember felt him moving to stand beside her. His hand found hers, their fingers intertwining, and the bond between them blazed so bright she could almost see it. Golden threads connecting their hearts. "You never made her. You tried to break her, and you failed. She's stronger than you ever imagined. Stronger than you'll ever be." "This isn't your fight, Wildfire." Corvus's eyes never left Ember. This is between me and my mate. I am not your mate. The power surged in response to her fury, and the golden dome flickered, the wolves within it whimpering as the pressure increased. I never was. Whatever twisted bond you forced on me, it's gone. The moment I felt the true bond, the real bond, I knew what you'd done, what you'd stolen, and I will never let you steal from me again. Corvus moved. He was fast. Faster than she'd expected, his body blurring as he lunged toward her, claws extending, teeth baring. But Ember was faster. The barrier contracted around him like a fist, freezing him mid-leap. He hung suspended in the golden light, his face twisted with rage, his claws inches from her throat. And Ember held him there. I was always something, she said quietly, stepping close enough to see the veins bulging in his neck, the panic starting to creep into his eyes. I was just waiting for a pack worth protecting. She turned to Cyrus. He's yours. The gratitude in Cyrus's eyes was fierce and tender all at once. Together, he reminded her. We face him together. Together, she agreed. And she let the barrier drop. Corvus hit the ground hard, but he was scrambling to his feet before the last of the golden light had faded. He shifted mid-movement, his wolf form erupting from his human body, a massive black beast with eyes that burned with hatred. Cyrus met him. The two alphas clashed in a storm of fur and fangs, their bodies moving almost too fast to follow. Corvus was larger, heavier, but Cyrus fought with the desperate fury of a wolf protecting his mate, his pack, his home. Blood flew, some of it silver, some of it black, and the watching wolves held their breath. Ember could feel every blow through the bond. She gasped when Corvus's claws raked across Cyrus's flank, cried out when teeth found shoulder. But she didn't interfere. This was Cyrus's battle as much as hers, and he needed to finish it. Corvus made a mistake. He overextended, going for Cyrus's throat, and the silver wolf twisted beneath him, jaws closing around Corvus's exposed neck. The black wolf thrashed, trying to break free, but Cyrus held firm. And then he looked at Ember. She understood what he was asking. Permission. Consent. Not because he needed it. Corvus had forfeited any right to mercy the moment he'd sold her like property, but because Cyrus wanted her to be part of this, wanted the decision to be hers. She nodded. Cyrus's jaws tightened. Corvus's thrashing grew weaker, then stopped entirely. When Cyrus released him, the black wolf crumpled to the ground, his eyes already glazing over, dead. For a moment, the courtyard was silent. Then the Blackwood wolves began to shift, to bow, to submit. Without their alpha, they had no reason to fight, and the fear in their eyes as they looked at Ember suggested they had no desire to face whatever power she possessed. "Take them to the cells," Ronan commanded, already moving to organize the Ashfall wolves. "We'll decide what to do with them tomorrow." But Ember wasn't listening. She was walking toward Cyrus, her legs shaking, her heart pounding, the adrenaline draining away and leaving exhaustion in its wake. He shifted to meet her, blood still streaming from a dozen wounds, and caught her in his arms before she could fall. "You're hurt," she said, her fingers finding the gash on his shoulder. "I'll heal." He pressed his forehead to hers, breathing her in. "You came. I told you to stay safe, and you came anyway. I couldn't let you fight alone." "I know." His voice was thick with emotion. "I felt you. Felt your power through the bond. You were magnificent. Terrifying and beautiful, and absolutely magnificent. I didn't know I could do that." "Neither did I." He pulled back just enough to cup her face in his hands. "But I'm not surprised. You've been extraordinary since the moment I saw you." She laughed, the sound wet with tears she hadn't realized she was crying. "I was covered in mud and chained to a wagon. And you still took my breath away." His thumb traced her cheekbone. "Ember, He stopped, swallowed hard. I need to claim you. Properly. I need the whole pack, the whole world, to know that you're mine and I'm yours. But only if you want it. Only if you're ready. The bond between them hummed with longing, with need, with a connection so deep, it felt like their souls had been waiting for each other across lifetimes. And Ember knew, with perfect clarity, what she wanted. Yes, she breathed. Tonight. Now. I don't want to wait any longer. They made their way to Cyrus's chambers, ignoring the knowing looks from the pack members they passed. The victory celebrations would come later. For now, there was something more important. Something sacred. The room was warm, lit by candles that cast dancing shadows on the walls. Cyrus closed the door behind them, and suddenly the battle, the blood, the chaos of the night seemed very far away. There was only this. Only him. Only her. Only the bond that connected them. Are you sure? He asked, his voice rough. After everything tonight. I've never been more sure of anything. She reached for him, pulling him close. Make me yours, Cyrus. Make me your Luna, your mate, your forever. And let me do the same for you. The sound he made was something between a growl and a groan, and then he was kissing her. Not gentle this time, not hesitant, but fierce and claiming and overwhelming. His hands traced her body with reverent hunger, finding curves swollen with pregnancy, and his touch sent sparks of pleasure racing along her nerves. So beautiful, he murmured against her skin. So strong, so utterly, completely mine. They moved to the bed, shedding clothes along the way, and when they were finally skin to skin, Ember gasped at the sensation. The bond amplified everything, every touch, every kiss, every whispered word. She could feel his desire as clearly as her own, his love as tangible as the hands that cradled her. Now, she breathed, please, Cyrus, I need. He understood. He always understood. His lips traced down her neck, finding the junction of her shoulder, and she felt his teeth graze her skin. The anticipation was almost unbearable. She was shaking with it, her wolf howling for completion. Mine, he growled against her pulse point. Yours, she answered. And he bit down. Pain lanced through her, sharp and bright, and she cried out. But the pain was already transforming, melting into something else. Pleasure rushed through her veins like liquid fire, and the bond between them blazed open. She could feel everything. His love, his devotion, his absolute commitment to protecting her and their pups for the rest of their lives. She could feel his wolf, fierce and tender, pressing against her own. She could feel the pack, connected to him and now to her, a web of bonds that welcomed her home. And beneath it all, she felt the promise, the vow, the unbreakable truth of what they were to each other. Mates. When Cyrus released her, licking the wound closed, his eyes were molten gold and wet with unshed tears. Ember, he breathed, my Luna. But it wasn't complete, not yet. She rose up, surprising him, and found the junction of his neck and shoulder with her own lips. He went very still, his breath catching, and she felt his shock through the bond. Most females didn't mark their mates, leaving the claiming one-sided, leaving the power unequal. She had no interest in unequal. Mine, she said, her voice fierce. Yours, he whispered, and she bit. The bond exploded. Where before it had been a river, now it was an ocean, vast and deep and infinite. She felt herself pour into him, and him pour into her, two souls becoming one while remaining separate, distinct, beloved. The sensation was indescribable, pleasure and pain and joy, and home all woven together into something that brought tears streaming down her cheeks. When she released him, they stared at each other in wonder. You marked me, Cyrus said, his voice awed. Did you think I wouldn't? She traced the wound on his shoulder, watching it already begin to heal into a scar that would proclaim her claim for all to see. You're mine, Cyrus, as much as I'm yours. Partners, equals, mates. Mates, he repeated, and the word was a prayer. They held each other as the bond settled into place, feeling it hum and pulse with new depth. Ember could feel her pups stirring, responding to the completion, and she knew somehow that they felt it too. The safety, the belonging, the absolute certainty that they were loved. They're happy, she whispered. Our pups. They know. Cyrus placed his hand over her belly, and his smile was radiant. Our pups, he repeated. Our pack. Our future. They slept entwined, and for the first time in months, Ember dreamed of nothing but peace. The formal ceremony came 3 days later. The entire pack gathered in the Great Hall, freshly repaired and decorated with banners bearing both the Ashfall crest and a new symbol, a phoenix rising from flames, representing renewal and hope. Ember stood at Cyrus's side, dressed in a gown of deep red that accommodated her swelling belly, her hair twisted into an elaborate braid threaded with gold. The mark on her shoulder was visible, displayed proudly for all to see, and on Cyrus's shoulder her mark proclaimed her claim just as clearly. Pack of Ashfall! Cyrus's voice rang through the hall, and every wolf fell silent. I present to you your Luna, Ember Wildfire, mother of the future heirs of Ashfall, my mate, my equal, my heart. Ember stepped forward, and the faces that looked back at her held no trace of the suspicion she'd once feared. These wolves had seen her stand against Corvus. They had felt her power wrap around them like a shield. They had watched her mark their alpha as firmly as he'd marked her. They knew exactly who she was. I came to Ashfall in chains, she said, her voice steady. Cast out, rejected, told I was cursed and worthless and better off dead. She placed a hand on her belly. But your alpha saw what no one else did. He saw a survivor, a mother, a wolf worth saving. She smiled, and it was fierce. I promise you now, as your Luna, that I will give this pack everything I have. My power, my loyalty, my life, if necessary, because this is my home now. You are my family, and I will protect you with everything I am. The howls that answered her shook the rafters. Afterward, as the celebration swirled around them, Cyrus drew her to a quiet corner. His hands found her belly, now so large that she sometimes wondered how she was still standing, and he knelt before her. Hello, little ones, he murmured, pressing a kiss to her navel. This is your father speaking. Though I suppose you already know that. You've felt me through the bond for days now. He smiled, and Ember's heart clenched at the tenderness in his expression. I want you to know some things. First, you are loved. All 6 of you, more than you will ever understand. Second, you are safe. No one will ever threaten you again. And third, he looked up at Ember, his eyes shining. Third, your mother is the most extraordinary woman I have ever known, and I am going to spend the rest of my life making sure she knows it. Ember ran her fingers through his hair, blinking back tears. You're going to make me cry again. Good. He rose, pulling her into his arms. You deserve to cry happy tears. After everything you've been through, you deserve a lifetime of them. From across the hall, Ronan caught her eye and raised his cup in salute. The Beta had been instrumental in the days since Corvus's defeat, organizing defenses, integrating the surrendered Blackwood wolves, sending messages to neighboring packs announcing the new Luna of Ashfall. He'd never said a word about her power, but she caught him watching her sometimes with an expression of profound respect. The other pack members had accepted her just as completely. Neve, the white-haired woman who'd called her the enemy's leftovers, had personally brought flowers to her chamber the morning after the battle. She'd stood stiffly at first, pride warring with shame, before tears had spilled down her face. "I saw you," Neve had said, "on the battlefield. You could have let us die, could have protected only yourself and the Alpha, but you shielded the whole pack." She'd fallen to her knees. "I was wrong about you. Forgive me." Ember had granted it freely. She understood fear and how it could twist people into cruelty. And she'd seen Neve fighting just as fiercely as anyone to defend Ashfall. She understood many things now that she hadn't before. "What are you thinking?" Cyrus asked, his thumb tracing circles on her lower back. "That I never expected this." She leaned into him, letting his warmth surround her. "When I was chained to that wagon, I thought my life was over. I thought I would die unmourned and unmissed, and my pups would never know anything but pain." Her voice caught. "But now." "Now?" She looked up at him. At this wolf who had seen her at her lowest and loved her anyway. Who had never asked her to be anything other than what she was. Who had trusted her to stand beside him even when everyone said she should hide. "Now I have everything," she said simply. "A mate who loves me, a pack that accepts me, pups who will grow up knowing they're cherished." She smiled, and it was radiant. "Now I have a home." Cyrus kissed her, soft and sweet and full of promise. "Welcome home, Luna," he murmured against her lips. "Welcome home." And as Ember leaned into her mate's embrace, feeling the bond between them pulse with love and belonging, her wolf finally fell silent. Not because there was nothing to say, but because, for the first time in her life, she was exactly where she was meant to be: home.